Call to order the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers, July 13th, 2023. Taking attendance by roll call, Manager Hitchmati is absent. Manager Maxwell?
Here.
Manager Miller?
Here.
Manager Sando?
Here.
Manager Loftus?
Here.
Manager Olson?
Here.
Manager White here. I see no members of the public, so let's go to item 3, which is approval.
Move approval.
Thank you, Manager Miller. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Sando seconds. Voting on approval of the agenda. Manager Olson?
Aye.
Manager Loftus?
Aye.
Manager Sando?
Aye.
Manager Miller?
Aye.
Manager Maxwell?
Aye.
And Manager White votes aye. We have an agenda. On our consent agenda are the minutes of the June 22nd board meeting and one consent resolution, which is 23037. It's for recognition for the Technical Advisory Committee members. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move approval.
I'll take a motion for Manager Miller, second for Manager Olson. Voting on the consent agenda, Manager Maxwell?
Aye.
Manager Miller?
Aye.
Manager Sando?
Aye.
Manager Loftus?
Aye.
Manager Olson?
Aye.
Manager White also votes aye. We have approved the consent agenda. I was perfectly prepared to say I had no meetings, but then I was called in to substitute for Mr. Whisker at an event in Wayzata yesterday, where they were having what they called a sand breaking, putting in the new boardwalk, which is part of their Panaway project. Very nice event, and I was reminded of my lowly status because the city manager thanked James for sending Sherry. I loved it. I was subbing. And then just a reminder that Minnesota Watersheds has asked if people have resolutions. So if we have anything we want to think about, give it to the district administrator and we can work it up for discussion. Manager Olson, would you report on Operations and Programs Committee, please?
Yes, tonight we went through the final review of our budget planning process, and we are now ready to submit that information to our CAC, Citizens Advisory Committee, and after that we will review anything that they have in terms of comments, and then we'll be ready to approve it in August.
Thank you. Are there any other meetings or events people would like to report on? The upcoming meeting and event schedule is in our agenda. July 18th, next week, is the Metro Watersheds meeting, which will be virtual, Manager Olson attending. And on the 19th, the CAC meeting, that will be Manager Loftus. And then just our usual fourth and second, don't scare Sherry, fourth and second Thursday meetings coming up after that. The next item of business is 10.1, permit 23-215. Ms. Friedge is presenting.
All right, can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Awesome. All right, well, good evening, President White and Board of Managers. Before I begin my presentation, I'd like to take some time to address to clarify any confusion regarding the owners of this property and the applicant of this project. So the Heaney family currently owns the subject parcel, 2285 Arboretum Boulevard. United Properties is the developer who is working on the plat and proposed development, and they have an option to purchase Lot 1, which is the senior living apartment complex, depending on the determination of the exception, district permit, as well as city permits. They are also the applicant for this permit. The Emir development is the name of the proposed development for the property. Lot 2, which is a new but not yet built single-family home, is not part of this project. This is a home that will be owned by one of the members of the Heaney family. So if it is ever developed in the future, this will be a separate contractor as well as a separate permit. Let me know if there's any questions about the parties involved in handling the property. I'm happy to clear up any confusion. Right, since that's all settled, we can move on to the presentation. So tonight I will be providing a briefing on permit 23-215, the Emira Development Project, located at 2285 Arboretum Boulevard in the city of Victoria. The applicant is seeking an exception from the wetland protection rule because they are not able to meet buffer width and total area requirements. For grounding purposes and to keep in mind during the presentation, an exception asks the board to consider how the applicant is proposing to offset the lost value and function of the impacted wetland buffer. This consideration has been forefront as staff have reviewed the permit application and rule requirements. Mr. David Knably is the engineer who I've been working with and is here on behalf of Civil Site Group, the engineering firm, as well as United Properties. And he can assist in answering questions if needed during the discussion portion at the end of the presentation. So this presentation will provide an overview of the project, including the project location and proposed development, as well as rule compliance, the exception request, and the applicant's proposal. The presentation will end with time for questions and discussion before board deliberation. The yellow icon, or dot, here on the map is the project location in relation to the entire district. As you can see, the project sits within the 6 Mile Creek Halsted Bay Subwatershed, which is in this area right here. This map shows a close-up of the project area, highlighted in yellow, right here. The project is located within the city of Victoria, just immediately west of the downtown area here, circled in red, as well as right next to the Lake Minnetonka Regional Trail, also here in red, as indicated by the line. It's also off of Arboretum Boulevard and Victoria Drive for reference point. On the south side of the property is 6 Mile Creek. You can see it kind of runs right through the south side of the property, and a wetland system. Everyone here knows that Wasserman Lake is right here, and from this lake, water moves north into the East Auburn wetland system right here, before moving through, again, this creek and wetland portion into East Auburn Lake. And then there is additional water runoff coming from the downtown Victoria area into the stormwater pond system that also discharges into East Auburn. East Auburn Lake is impaired, so a lot of this permit was focusing on water quality and improving water resources. There are several different district projects located near the proposed development, as shown by the yellow boxes and white callouts on the map, that are all focused on improving water resources and water quality, and that's some that the district is still working on right now. This map shows an aerial of the 40-acre property and the proposed project. Here you can see 6 Mile Creek running through the southern portion of the property that surrounds the creek. And then as 6 Mile Creek leaves the property, it flows under Arboretum Boulevard and into East Auburn Lake, which is just north. This is a closer view of the proposed development, so I can clearly point out some of the different areas. The property of 2285 Arboretum Boulevard is proposed to be subdivided into 3 lots. Lot 1 here in green is the proposed senior living apartment complex. Lot 2 in yellow here is the proposed new single-family home, which is going to be owned by a member of the Heaney family and has yet to be built. And then Lot 3 in blue is an existing single-family home, which is also owned by a member of the Heaney family. Here in purple as well as red, this is a future project. It's not part of this permit or this project, but United Properties is proposing to install a boardwalk here in this purple section that will connect the property's sidewalk segments to the Lake Minnetonka Regional Trail, which is here in red. So again, not part of the project, but hopefully a future permit application. Now that we've looked at the project location within the district and the proposed development of the site, I will review each of the district rules triggered and how the proposed project meets each requirement. The district's erosion control rule applies to a land disturbance of at least 5,000 square feet, or the excavation, fill, or stockpiling on site of at least 50 cubic yards of soil or earth material. The applicant is proposing 7.6 acres of disturbance and over 13,000 cubic yards of excavation. Therefore, the erosion control rule is triggered. The applicant has met the intent and criteria of the erosion control rule by providing an erosion control and sediment control plan that indicates best management practices. For example, a rock construction entrance here in the red square. Perimeter control measures around the entire site is indicated by the red line. Double perimeter control along the wetland, as well as inlet protection at every single catch basin on the site or nearby. Staff find that the requirements of the erosion and sediment control rule have been met with the submission of this plan. The district stormwater management rule is applied to projects that propose to create or replace impervious surface and requires applicants to submit a stormwater management plan for approval. Requirements are based on site size, percent site disturbance, and change in impervious cover. Because there are existing structures and impervious cover on the property, this site is qualified as a redevelopment. The project proposes redevelopment on a parcel greater than 1 acre, has less than 40% site disturbance, and more than a 50% increase in impervious surface. Therefore, the site is required to show no net increase in peak runoff rates from the 1, 10, and 100-year storm events. Volume control in an amount equivalent to the first 1 inch of runoff from the site's impervious cover, and phosphorus control in an amount equivalent to what is achieved by providing volume control. There are 3.42 acres of impervious surface proposed for this site. 0.3 acres are sidewalk segments as shown in red on the map that will not exceed, or that are exempt from the stormwater management rule because these segments do not exceed 12 feet in width and are bordered by an impervious buffer, in this case the key wetland buffer, and average at least 1/2 of the width of the sidewalk. 3.12 acres of the proposed impervious cover are not exempt. That is any of the proposed buildings, existing home, proposed home, road, as well as parking lot of the site. And these areas will need to meet the requirements of the stormwater management rule. The applicant has proposed to meet volume control through filtration using an underground detention system with a proprietary cartridge filter, as indicated by the blue as well as the red square on the map, as well as a surface filtration basin as indicated by the yellow and the yellow mark here on the map. Volume control is being provided, volume control is met by providing 2 inches, or is being met by providing 2 inches of filtration from runoff, which satisfies the volume requirement. That has the effect of making sure the peak rates of storm events don't increase and that the system is getting the required pounds of phosphorus reduction. The project as proposed, upon fulfillment of the recommended condition to submit a recordation of the maintenance declaration, meets the requirements of the stormwater management rule. A 30-acre type 2, 3, and 4 wetland, which is a wet meadow, shallow marsh, and deep marsh according to the Eggers and Reed classification, is identified on the property as having a preserve management classification per the district's functional assessment of wetlands. The wetland is a surrounding environment to 6 Mile Creek, which discharges north into East Auburn Lake, as you can see here on the map. The proposed work will not involve any filling, draining, or excavation of the wetland, but vegetated buffer requirements apply if the work requires a permit under the stormwater management or water body crossings and structures rule. Because a permit is required under the stormwater management rule, the buffer requirement applies. Based on the review of the submitted plans, the applicant is not able to meet the required minimum buffer width and total average buffer area. The board is being asked to consider an exception to these wetland buffer requirements on the basis that the applicant is proposing to offset the loss function and value of the impacted wetland buffer. We've now reviewed the geography of the project area as well as district rules that are triggered with the project. In this next section of the presentation, I will be reviewing the applicant's exception request and proposal to offset the ecologic and water quality values and functions that the loss buffer width would have supplied. The district's variance and exception rule allows the Board of Managers to grant an exception from the provision of the rules on a determination that the proposed application will achieve a greater degree of water resource protection than strict compliance with the provision. The applicant has requested an exception from the buffer minimum width and total buffer area required by the wetland protection rule. There are 3 locations where the minimum buffer width is not provided due to the proposed building and surrounding sidewalk locations, as indicated on the map in the red circles. In these locations, the rule would require 37.5 feet of minimum buffer width. At segment 1, the applicant has proposed 18.8 feet of wetland buffer. At segment 2, 10.8 feet. And at segment 3, 18.6 feet of buffer. The total buffer area required for the site is 146,621 square feet. The proposed buffer area is short 16,940 square feet, which is approximately 11% of the total buffer area. To offset the lost habitat and stormwater functions of the buffer shortfall, the applicant is proposing an enhanced buffer planting plan and stormwater management that exceeds what the rule requires. When reviewing the proposal, we are keeping in mind the ecologic and water quality functions and values of the lost wetland buffer. Before I go into analyzing the applicant's alternative proposal, I want to provide context on how the site plan has changed. Over the last several months, the applicant has worked with the district and staff to adjust the building footprint and move the site closer to Arboretum Boulevard to eliminate any direct wetland impacts. This change also reduced the amount of wetland buffer impacts that were initially proposed. As you can see here, it was proposed to potentially fill the wetland, which would also impact the buffer area. Now that we've talked about the buffer shortfall, there are 2 ways staff and the district engineer have thought about the lost wetland buffer and how we've analyzed the applicant's proposal. We are looking at ecological function, like plant diversity, soil stabilization, terrestrial and aquatic habitat, environmental education, and wetland bounds, as well as water quality, water and pollutant runoff from the site, and infiltration into the ground and wetland that surrounds the site. In terms of ecological function, the applicant is proposing to go above and beyond the minimum requirement to reseed and stabilize the wetland buffer, as shown by green here on the map. It's all the areas in green. They are proposing to do this by installing over 1,000 sedge plant plugs, 58 shrubs, 7 ornamental trees whose species include autumn brilliant serviceberry, thornless hawthorn, and American hop hornbeam, as well as 12 eastern large evergreen trees and over 50 deciduous trees whose species include 2 different kinds of maple trees, birch, hickory, and 3 different types of oak trees. The plugs will be provided throughout the wetland buffer, but focused in areas adjacent to the locations of reduced buffer width along the wetland edge, here in the red circles. Again, those are the areas where the buffer width is not being met. But the sedge plugs will also be provided throughout the wetland buffer as well. You can see here in some other yellow areas. These sedge plugs will increase biomass production within the buffer area and provide water transpiration in the spring and erosion prevention through root growth and soil stabilization. The trees and shrubs will also be provided or planted throughout the buffer area, as you can see on the map with the black and purple circles of various sizes. I know these might be a little bit hard to see, but they are on the map, but I wasn't able to circle all of them. These plantings will bring vertical structure, songbird nesting, terrestrial habitat, shaded aquatic habitat, food sources for birds and animals, and pollinator habitat to the buffer area, just to name a few of the benefits. In addition, the root systems of these trees and shrubs will promote infiltration, soil stabilization, shading, and carbon sequestration. Increasing the diversity of native plant species within a planted buffer will increase its resilience to environmental stressors and reduce the occurrence of non-native or invasive species that may require chemical treatments or maintenance disturbance. Staff finds that the proposed planting plan will increase the volume and diversity of plant composition within the wetland buffer beyond that which would be achieved through a standard seeding plan required under the rule. In addition to the enhanced buffer planting plans, the applicant has provided a plan to provide more water quality benefit than would otherwise be provided by the approximate 11% shortfall in wetland buffer. A standard design of this stormwater system, again highlighted in blue and outlined in the red box, would use a sand filter to receive water from the underground detention system. The applicant has proposed the addition of a proprietary cartridge filter to receive and treat water from the underground storage device, which is this plan right here. Stormwater functions that may have been provided by the 16,940 square foot wetland buffer shortfall have been evaluated against the supplemental water quality treatment being provided by the addition of this filter to provide secondary treatment for runoff leaving the underground detention system. The stormwater management rule would be satisfied if the applicant were proposing to use a standard sand filter. By installing a cartridge filter, there will be 1.2 pounds per year more total phosphorus reduction provided, which is approximately 90% more than what is required. The filtration device will collect both particulate and dissolved phosphorus, which will provide enhanced phosphorus reduction from the site before being discharged to 6 Mile Creek and East Auburn Lake. In consultation with the district engineer, staff have found that the additional 1.2 pounds per year of total phosphorus reduction being provided will exceed the water quality that would have been provided by the lost 16,940 square footage of wetland buffer. Staff and the district engineer have evaluated the exception to the wetland buffer provisions by looking at the replaced ecological and water quality functions and values of the proposal, and find that the applicant has provided sufficient evidence that the proposed project will achieve a greater degree of water resource protection than would strict compliance with the rule. Staff recommends approval of the permit application with the conditions listed at the beginning of the report. Thank you, President White and Board of Managers, for listening to this briefing on permit 23-215 and the applicant's exception request and proposal. If anyone has any questions or comments, I'm happy to address them now.
Thank you, Ms. Bridges. I believe we need to move on the exception first. So is there a motion to approve the exception?
So moved.
Manager Olson, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Miller seconds. Any questions for Ms. Bridges?
Just a comment, thank you for the detailed amount of work that's gone into this permit. It's heartening to hear that we're exceeding what would normally be offered in nature with their intervention and their plans, so I appreciate that, thank you.
Thank you, Manager Olson.
The planting list of plantings is really impressive. I like that a lot. Anything else before voting? Very well, then voting on the approval of the exception. Manager Maxwell?
Aye.
Manager Miller?
Aye.
Manager Sando?
Aye.
Manager Loftus?
Aye.
Manager Olson?
Aye.
Manager White also votes aye. So we've approved the exception, and now we would need to have a motion on the permit with all the conditions and the exception.
So moved.
Manager Olson moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Sando seconds. Any further discussion before voting? Voting then on the permit. Manager Olson?
Aye.
Manager Loftus?
Aye.
Manager Sando?
Aye.
Manager Miller?
Aye.
Manager Maxwell?
Aye.
And Manager White also votes aye. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
The next item is 11.1. Ms. Cermak presenting Resolution 23038.
Apologize, I can't find my cursor. There it is. I'm so sorry. No, you're good.
All right. Good evening, President White, Board of Managers. Here tonight seeking authorization to release an RFP for our watershed-wide model input refinement work. I'm going to start off by just positioning where all this 2D modeling related work sits within our climate action framework, give you an update on where we're at with our pilot model project and how work and learnings from the pilot have directly shaped the work in front of you tonight. Walk through the elements of the RFP, the timeline, and our anticipated budget, and wrap up with a recommendation. So as we well know, our climate action framework is comprised of these three key pillars. And these really lay out a pathway for us to follow to bring us towards successful and measurable climate adaptation. And our first pillar of our framework is really centered around developing a greater understanding of how climate change is stressing our system today, and how those issues are going to change under predicted climate patterns. So in order to give us that understanding, one of the key tools we've identified needing is a higher resolution, two-dimensional watershed-wide model. And this model is going to allow us to really understand how water is moving through our system at a much higher resolution, and give us the opportunity to evaluate and prioritize climate adaptation strategies such as different policies or projects. And when we think about a model build, we typically have two buckets of work that go into any model build. The first is comprised of just getting your arms around all the data sets needed to incorporate into a model, getting those data sets processed and formatted into the format that the model software requires, and along the way identifying critical data gaps that you'll need to fill before model construction. The second step is taking advantage of all the processed data sets, incorporating that into your model, getting a functional running model, and then of course calibrating with your measured data that you have in your area of interest. When we look ahead at the district's watershed climate model, there's of course some areas of technical challenge in any model build, and with the climate model, we did flag a couple areas of technical challenge and risk, one of which being how we were going to incorporate the numerous stormwater infrastructure data sets that exist within the watershed boundary, since all of those are stored in their own unique kind of schema and structure. Relating to the model build, there was a risk on making sure we're selecting the right platform that really is well suited and designed to answer the questions we have in front of us for climate planning. And when we didn't receive LCCMR funding during the 2021 cycle, we decided to pursue the pilot model build, really centered around tackling those areas of risk. And phase one of the pilot model was all about establishing that semi-automated framework to address our concern of pipelining all these storm sewer data sets into the model, and along the way identifying what data gaps the district had and needed to fill prior to watershed-wide construction. Phase two of the pilot model was really about evaluating the two tested softwares, both ICM and ICPR are two names of our models, and building those out in our test geographies and really starting to understand the strengths and weaknesses of each. We are fully complete with phase one of the pilot model. We wrapped that work up in fall of 2022. And we are near the finish line here with phase two of the pilot model and are just working to draft the final project summary report. When we look ahead at watershed-wide work, this is going to follow a really similar parallel process to any model build, where we're going to have a bucket of work related to data processing before we get into the actual model construction and calibration work. And bear with me, this is going to get a busy slide here, but what's really important to note is that our pilot model work is directly shaping how we're going to do our work and what work needs to happen within this watershed-wide kind of swim lane. And why that's so important is that it's allowed us to actually move forward with some watershed-wide work ahead of us closing out the pilot model and making that decision around model platform. And so we've already done that. You'll recall we entered into a scope with Bolton and Mink in December last year to standardize all of our municipal stormwater data sets. So that work is underway. And that leaves us with a couple more areas of work for phase one of the watershed-wide build, along with kind of the full build out in phase two. Instead of bringing forward an all-encompassing scope for this remainder of the work, we've decided to kind of break out the remainder of phase one in the RFP that's in front of you tonight. And really what that's allowing us to do is continue to make progress kind of and hit our overarching timeline, while giving us some extra time to really do a thorough engagement process around this model platform decision. So we've started engaging with the technical advisory committee to really help us stress test all our findings from the pilot model, continue to get more of our kind of technical questions answered with that group. We're drawing on our municipal engineers for that, academics, and some of our public agency staff. But we also know there's a major relational component to this decision, how our cities and agencies are going to interact with this model through our climate action framework, and how groups interact with our current watershed-wide model kind of on a day-to-day basis. And so we really want to take time to engage with them on the front end of this decision and bring them along and really talk through the trade-offs that we're considering with these models. So that was a lot. I want to try to walk through it again, but in a more chronological way. So you can see here the pilot model is nearing closeout. And we've started some watershed-wide work, that data standardization scope. We are closing that out as well this month. So we'll be walking away with a watershed-wide standardized single format database. The RFP in front of you tonight looks to tackle that remainder of identified phase one kind of data processing work and data gap collection. And it's an exciting milestone as we are starting to draw on some of the LCCMR funds that became available this month. So then looking out, once we work through that engagement, bring that through our liaisons and through the board for discussion, we're looking to release an RFP for that phase two work later this fall and starting that work through 2024. So for the remainder of the presentation, I'm going to focus in on the actual RFP that's in front of you tonight and kind of the key task areas there. So the pilot model, phase one, really told us that we're gonna need to do some adaptation work to the process that it developed to account for the watershed-wide data set. And it also identified some areas of data gap collection that we could tackle ahead of model construction. So the watershed-wide automated framework was built with scaling in mind, but it only accounted for 3 of the 27 stormwater infrastructure data sets, so just our pilot geographies. And so it identified as we scale to watershed-wide, we need to now have the consultant take a look at our watershed-wide database and make sure that this process is robust enough to account for the range of issues and gaps that are going to be present when looking at 27 data sets. Another area that the phase one really focused on was just where we have critical gaps. And really how we've defined a critical gap is where data just doesn't exist and it's really challenging to fill within a model using an assumption. And one of those critical areas was our channel geometry. You might remember that I was in front of the board last October to bring forward a scope with MnDOT to fly LiDAR along the creek and take advantage of our drought conditions with some maybe fortunate but unfortunate rain and snow in November. We weren't able to fly that anymore. The conditions just weren't prime. That scope is still, we're still under contract with MnDOT and we have that pricing guaranteed through this calendar year. So that's still definitely something on the table and something we're watching, but we are moving forward under the assumption that we won't be able to take advantage of that, knowing that this is a data set we can't risk not having. So we're asking the consultant to work with us to really fine-tune a collection plan on where these cross sections should be collected across our kind of major channel areas, do the field work, and then provide us with a database that has all that spatial information and spatial pictures. And then another gap area that we know exists is our culverts, specifically in our upper watershed where it's more rural and where culverts are kind of a primary stormwater infrastructure out there. The problem is we don't quite have a handle on the magnitude of this gap and how influential this will be to the modeling. So we are asking the consultant to do a spatial analysis in GIS where you can identify where culvert gaps exist by looking at kind of where water's pooling along a highway, for an example. And this is just going to help us kind of get a handle on the magnitude of this data set gap and help us come up with a prioritization collection plan that we can take. And during phase 2, we have more money set aside for data collection within our LCCMR scope. And we want to make sure we're kind of couching this against some other data gaps that we know exist, and make a decision kind of comprehensively on how far we would chase collecting some of this information. So this is kind of the groundwork for that.
Does the word gap refer to the fact we don't know enough culvert detail?
Manager Olson, it's referring to when we look at a data set, when we say a critical gap, we just mean there's nothing there. So there might be a data set that has a few culverts in it, but until we do this analysis, we don't know if we are missing 20% or 30% of the culverts that exist.
Okay.
The posted anticipated budget that we're including within the RFP is a range of $130,000 to $170,000. We are planning for this work to be funded in combination with district funds and LCCMR funds. The district's budgeted $80,000 for data collection efforts this year, and we now have access to that $738,000 from LCCMR. So once we get proposals back and kind of look at how the work shakes out across those areas of work, we will of course come back with a more fine-tuned kind of budget analysis of how much money is being drawn from the district funds versus LCCMR. We are planning to release the RFP tomorrow, and following a pretty typical process, giving them a chance to ask some questions before submitting their proposals on Monday, August 7th, so just over a 3-week window. We are planning to conduct interviews on Monday, August 21st, and plan to bring this back for recommendation at the first meeting in September. So with that, staff are seeking approval for Resolution 23038, authorization to release the RFP. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Cermak. Is there a motion to
Move
adopt the
approval.
resolution? Manager Miller moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Olson seconds. Questions from Ms. Cermak? Yes.
I just got some comments. Arun and I were liaisons to the study, and it's pretty technical for my background, but the staff did such a phenomenal job of explaining everything that even I got it, and Arun got into it really deep, and we're really excited about this project because it's going to make us a reliable source of information, and everybody will seek our support and help. There was just one issue that the staff brought to our attention, is that we got to make sure that there's full acceptance of the system that we're putting together, because there's some other variation of it that some of the cities are using that their consultants may not want to modify or whatever, but they're working on making sure that we satisfy everybody so that nobody discounts the quality of this work or the usefulness of this work. So I mean, if you could address that a little bit.
Yeah, President White, Manager Miller, I'll follow up on that. I think what Manager Miller is referring to is when we pursued bringing these two platforms into the pilot model, we selected them with climate in mind and those climate needs. But we've also considered along the way how a watershed-wide model could be used more globally, how our partners interact currently with our watershed-wide XP swim model, and really evaluate whether it could serve both, knowing that our XP swim model software is sunsetting. So eventually something would need to kind of replace how that serves our partners. And so what we're finding, though, and maybe not to a surprise, is that there is not a perfect model that can do everything well. And so we're really trying to kind of tease apart those trade-offs and making sure that we're, framing why we are valuing these climate needs within this decision, and making sure we can really forecast to our partners then what that's going to mean for the day-to-day interaction with XP Swim and some of those things.
Manager Olson?
Going back to the comments on LiDAR research, is there any way we can create a dry creek in a narrow window of time in order to do that study? Do we have that kind of control?
President White,
Yeah.
Manager Olson, yes, so the leaves dropping and the seasonality is an important thing we're waiting for, and that's why we didn't quite hit this perfect window. But even last year, you saw once we closed the dam, it takes quite a while for that kind of groundwater kind of recharge into the system to dry up. And even last year, there were still areas within the creek that remained wet. And so we know, even if we can fly lighter, there's going to be areas where we're still going to need to go in more manually with cross sections. But no, I don't think without pumping, it out, it would be able to dry up that fast from something we could control.
It would be great if we could get 80% of it done that way and physically do the rest, but
Yeah.
I can't imagine.
Conditions are looking like, I definitely think there's a hopeful chance that we'll be able to use it in some way, but not putting all our eggs in that basket.
The comment about leaves, if you line it with leaves, that helps us.
We don't want leaves on the trees still.
Same.
For yes.
We don't need leaves in the creek.
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else? I thought this was a really interesting report. I was very interested, especially in the culvert information, thinking about working out those missing information. So I liked the report a lot.
Great.
Of our own issues, expected a summary of the thing that for me to present, but the staff report was complete, so I don't think it's need to, but I just want to acknowledge that he did prepare a professional summary, as you'd expect from him, so I want to mention that.
Thank you then. Voting on adopting the resolution, Manager Maxwell?
Aye.
Manager Miller?
Aye.
Manager Sando?
Aye.
Manager Loftus?
Aye.
Manager Olson?
Aye.
And Manager White also votes aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Heyman has Resolution 2339.
Good evening, Chair White and managers. Here before you this evening, seeking authorization to distribute the revised capital improvement plan, or CIP, to our counties and municipalities for 30-day review and comment. This year's CIP will again include our detailed 5-year look at our capital project planning, known as our multi-year CIP. Each year, as described in our plan, we do revise our 10-year CIP and distribute it to our member cities and counties for that 30-day review and comment, really with the purpose of allowing us to adjust our CIP and reflect to our member communities, as well as adjust with our member communities around the feasibility of potential projects, the identification of new projects, if something's come through the Land and Water Partnership Program and that makes its way into our CIP, shift in our priorities, and also just the assessment of our staff or financial capacity. As the projects are continually being developed, this process allows us to really give us a little bit more specificity and clarity to our member communities each year, and so we do it annually, just to remind them that we have a very solid, specific implementation approach, but also a land and water partnership approach that keeps the door open for member communities that may not be in a focal geography. As I noted, the 2024 CIP will highlight our multi-year CIP initiative yet again, and that was developed throughout 2022 with a lot of the elements noted before you, really to improve clarity around our near-term project initiatives, but also to create a better forecast for, or a better framework for forecasting future projects, and then using this as a real opportunity to communicate the CIP to our external communities, our partner communities. This is the same format that we distributed last year, and it was really well received. We received feedback from our communities who noted they really appreciated the added clarity around our capital project investments and the specificity around the locations and timeline. And so, as is the case every year, the CIP will be accompanied with a cover letter, and that will reference, as always, our model of integrated planning. It'll promote early coordination and ask for any potential project opportunities that may be available to us through our Land and Water Partner Program. It will also include the typical 10-year CIP, but we have revised it, and I'll show that in a moment, along with our multi-year CIP and the project pages. We don't include project pages for active design or construction. When we developed this last year, for instance, we don't have a one-pager for 325 Blake Road. The amount of information available to our communities with designs and our website and other elements is much more informative than a simple one-pager at this point. But the complementary pages are generally focused on projects that are more likely to move forward on a quicker timescale. We would aim to create a one-pager for every project that is like specific project identified in our CIP in the future, beyond just opportunity-based, but we haven't gotten to that level yet with the multi-year CIP. Bear with me on the next few slides. They're just to show what our communities will receive. We always distribute the full CIP, the full 10-year CIP. Starting last year, we modified this table to actually break it down by sub-watershed rather than by year. In the comp plan, in our actual 2017 Water Resources Management Plan, it's by year, and so the sub-watersheds or geographies kind of bounce around. It can be difficult for communities to find the sub-watershed or area they may be most interested in. And then it will be accompanied with our multi-year CIP. This is just a snippet of that, but we've continued to build this out in concert with the revised budget process that you would have seen at the, or budget format that you would have seen at the committee meeting this evening. So starting to identify out years beyond the end of this Water Resource Management Plan cycle, because it will sunset before the multi-year CIP timeline. So we'll start to predict out into 2028, 29, and 2030. And then lastly, each of those identified projects will have its project one-pager. So in front of you, this is for the Greenway to Cedar Trail connection. It provides an opportunity for the communities to understand the scope, the goals, and justification for a project like this, and then gives them a understanding of the location and phasing of the project and likely cost budget associated with that. So this evening, I'm happy to answer any questions on projects specifically. I know we've covered most of them or all of them throughout the budget process in committee. It's also been before the CAC, who I presented to in May, and received feedback from them as well. So this evening we'd be seeking authorization to distribute the draft CIP for 30-day review and comment.
Thank you, Mr. Heyman. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
I make the motion.
Manager Sando moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Miller seconds. Any questions for Mr. Heyman? As you say, we've seen iterations of this along the way. Question? Your face says you have a question.
I actually don't know. I'm
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, then voting on adoption of the resolution. Manager Olson?
Aye.
Manager Loftus?
Aye.
Manager Sando?
Aye.
Manager Miller?
Aye.
Manager Maxwell?
Aye.
Manager White also votes aye. Manager Olson, I recognize you.
Okay, so this is not related to the vote. How have the responses been to our annual submittals like this? Do we get comments back?
Manager Olson, managers, on average, I would say we get 2 to 3 comments from some of our member communities. Typically, they're the communities that we're actually working with already, but they may be identifying another project opportunity or requesting a meeting to talk about a potential park project or other opportunity within their community. The only other feedback we really received last year, we spoke with a variety of the communities. Anna and myself would reach out to them to see what they thought about the new multi-year CIP framework, and that's where we received most of the feedback, that it was just much more clear. They understand now what we're looking at over 5 years and where those locations might be. But typically, it's our partner communities just mentioning, by the way, we have this one coming up and would love to have a meeting about it.
Okay, so they're taking it under advisement, and they're used to seeing it, because out of a 10-year plan, they see it 9 times.
Yep.
Okay.
I got one question.
Yes.
How do you make sure that they understand that we're looking for opportunities to?
Great, Manager Miller, that's a great question. Something we've been highlighting now in the cover letter that we distribute, as well as the email, is the Land and Water Partnership Program, our flexibility, and really the approach that we took with the Water Resource Management Plan to remain nimble, and asking them to reach out to myself and the Kate and Becky, the Land and Water Program, to communicate any potential opportunities they may have in their community, including if they are aware of private development opportunities that may be coming down the pipe, so we can start early conversations around that.
And maybe it'd be too much to send out with this kind of a required notice, but maybe give them examples of other projects that we've done in the past with on an opportunity basis.
Great feedback. Thank you.
Anything else before we vote? And voting to, we already voted. I apologize, I lost my place. We already voted. Can't retract it now. The next item up is a discussion item regarding 325 Lake Road restoration and redevelopment. And Mr. Smith, when time comes, I'll ask you to state the reason for a closed session. Go ahead, Mr. Heeman.
Great. Well, thank you, Chair White. Managers before you this evening to provide an update on the 325 Blake Road restoration and redevelopment. We had a couple of May milestones. That was the last time we were really before the board discussing this project. The board approved final design of the 325 Blake Road project, as well as Cottageville Phase 2. We also had our development partner, Alatis Development LLC, exercised their first extension to the purchase and sale agreement. So they'd reached the 1-year milestone and had exercised their 90-day extension on May 9th. Just to remind the board, the site orientation of the master plan, because a lot of the language we'll use as we talk through the development is based on the alphabetized site. And let me grab my laser pointer just to remind the board how this works. It's really building A at the north, and then the buildings move alphabetically counterclockwise. So you have building B, C, D, the commercial space is now E, and then you have, of course, the site infrastructure and stormwater cascade, and then all of the district's property or anticipated future property as part of the greenway. The last one I'll note is where the townhomes are listed. That's identified and platted as Outlot C, which is one of the parcels that often comes up as they're developing Building A. You'll recall that in June and July of 2022, the district did sell 1.34 acres. That's identified in the orange block to Alatis to accommodate affordable housing development that they'd received bonds for. Part of that sale also required the developer to put $1 million of non-refundable escrow payment that would be applied to Phase 1B at the time of that acquisition, or would go to the district if the remainder of the development did not advance, demonstrating what the remainder of the parcel is that is not encumbered after that sale once the stormwater and construction agreements terminate with the transfer of that parcel. That parcel is under construction. It's nearing completion. Actually, they're expecting it to be turned over to the developer on December 1st, and they'll be starting leasing activities actually in August. So a little bit of an update on that parcel as well. The current purchase and sale agreement has a feasibility period identified in it, and what that means is the feasibility period is the amount of time that Alatis has exclusive rights to conduct due diligence, secure financing as it moves towards closing. It was a 1-year timeline from the date of execution of the purchase and sale agreement, and then also allowed them to exercise 2 90-day extensions at $25,000 each, which does not apply to the purchase price and is non-refundable. They did extend, May 9th, and so the termination time of that first extension would be August 7th, which is what's approaching, obviously within the next month. If they choose to exercise that extension, of course, it would bring them into November of this year. And so really, what we're discussing this evening is in June of 2023, so just about a month ago, Lattice did request consideration of the board a second amendment to the purchase and sale agreement that would modify the original terms of the agreement, which leads us to the discussion this evening. And so with that, I will turn it to legal counsel, who has suggested that the board would enter into closed session to explore options regarding this negotiation.
Thank you. Mr. Smith?
Madam President, given that Lattice is requesting or proposing an amendment to the purchase and sale agreement, it would be appropriate for the board to go into closed session for the purpose of considering that in terms of the terms under which it may sell the property.
Thank you. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Sando, seconds. Voting on going into closed session, Manager Maxwell?
Aye.
Manager Miller?
Aye.
Manager Sando?
Aye.
Manager Loftus?
Aye.
Manager Olson?
Aye.
And Manager White also votes aye. We are now in closed session. Motion to move into open session.
So moved.
Second.
And motion second. Voting on moving into open session, Manager Olson?
Aye.
Manager Loftus?
Aye.
Manager Sando?
Aye.
Manager Miller?
Aye.
Manager Maxwell? I don't know if Gene's still with
I
us.
think we lost him and call it a 5-0 vote because you can't see him anymore.
Okay, sure, and I vote aye as well.
Okay.
Item 13, are there inquiries, issues, or ideas to add? Manager Olson?
I have just one. I was out at the 6 Mile Marsh Trail, and that trail is outstanding. There are very big red and white signs along the trail that say no trespassing, and our logo's on it, which is a little bit jarring because you think, should I be here? And what I think we should add to that sign is stay on the trail. What our mission is to get them off the prairie where we've done the plantings, but it doesn't say stay on the trail, it just says no trespassing. So you kind of wonder, should I really be here on this trail? And I think if we just add that note to those signs, it'd be helpful.
The quality of the graphics is just phenomenal. It's couldn't be better. It's something you'd find at the Getty Museum or something like that. I mean, it's really, really high quality.
Yep.
And it's superb. And I hope that's our new standard, because it's so excellent.
I've been up to the park 2 times, and the completion is excellent, just excellent. And maybe we could keep the signs as a continuity, like 9 Mile or 3 Rivers does. All our signs and logos are the same, like Edina or whatever.
Mike?
Chair White Managers, I can just note timing as well. So we actually had a substantial completion walkthrough on Tuesday. So I was out there with the contractor and our landscape architect. We did a full site walkthrough, have the final punch list to the contractor. There are a few loose ends. One of them is some of the no trespassing signs and some of the other signs that can now be removed. Some of that was to keep people out while we were in active construction. And then there are a few final sign panels that need to just be affixed to the signs because we have this Core-10 and then the galvanized steel or the stainless steel on it. And I will say even our landscape architect was impressed with the detail of this stainless steel printing that the way they were able to etch it is pretty remarkable. It turned out really well. So it's about complete, and then we just have fall final seating, overseating, and it'll be back into regular warranty.
I wouldn't order a lot more of those cargo seats, so. I mean, it's fine, but it's, I wouldn't want to be dependent on how comfortable they are. Just take a
You're
rest or
going to
something.
carry your lawn chair with you when you go?
Well, nobody's going to sleep on them, I'll tell you that.
Thanks for that, Mike. Staff update, Mr. Whisker, Administrator's Report.
Yes, President White, managers, thank you. Just on the topic of signage, I'll make another note that Hennepin County staff joined us in Carver County. I didn't know they were allowed to do that. They crossed county lines and joined us at Wasserman Park for the LCCMR, or the Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council tour. And afterwards, they'd followed up saying, with that standard of signs, which been improved upon for the prairie, how amazed they were, and they're looking at signage standards and really wanted to kind of pull from our detail sheets as something that we're looking at for the county, so for what that's worth. Water level update. So the Tiffany and obviously the Watershed District sent out a water level update to community partners today. The board's received a copy of that in our MailChimp email format. So Grays Bay Dam is now closed. 11 to 13% of the state, including Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, is in severe drought. We've hit drought this year 1 month earlier than last year. I mean, we've been in a drought for a while. So that happened a month earlier in 23 than it did 2022. We're 3.67 inches below normal. And we're starting to set records on the other end of the spectrum from where we were when we had flooding. So May 15th to June 21st was the driest period on record in history. June, which is typically the wettest month in Minnesota, was the second driest ever recorded in 2023. So we have ended up closing Grays Bay Dam 2 weeks earlier than last year. A big part of our communication that I've mentioned before is we're seeing 7 times more loss from Lake Minnetonka due to evaporation and heat loss than we've seen out of the trickle of base flow, 12 cubic feet per second. And now that cubic feet per second is 0. So Lake Minnetonka is at 928.5. It's 10 inches below ordinary high water. So pretty striking impacts from the weather that we've been having this season. I'm going to shift now to a boardwalk update. I've given the board an update the last couple of meetings, and so some of this will be a little bit of repetition, but recap. We are making progress. I mentioned this last time. Some of the progress has been administrative because we haven't wanted to turn the contractor loose to just do a fix here and do a fix there. We've been working through comprehensive inspection, submittal, and approval process to turn them loose. So staff has, since the last meeting, we have inspected all accessible headers, 172 of them. We have found at least one defect, whether it's not max nailed, nails protruding, hanger issues, gaps, shims, one of those sort of range of issues at 171 out of 172 issues, headers. Well, like I said last time, the good news is a lot of that is actually manageable and fixable and isn't compromising the actual structural integrity of the boardwalk, but we want it finished right. And so based on the inspection results, this is not new news. On June 30th, SRF issued a comprehensive or an amended defective work notice and request to uncover portions of the boardwalk, and that was a threshold that we've crossed, is having them take out the parts that are inaccessible. And JTS has since agreed to uncover the inaccessible headers of approximately 60 of them to ensure that all defects in all the areas that are currently inaccessible are identified and corrected. And they've submitted a plan for doing that, for the uncovering to SRF. They've also submitted, the contractor has submitted to SRF solutions for each of the 11 categories of defective work. 5 out of 11, so about 50% of the solutions are just, we're going to bring it into spec, which means they're not requiring formal approval from us. They're just going to go make sure it's right. The remaining 6 out of 11 solutions, whether it's a modified bracket in certain instances, if the gaps, 5/8 of an inch, are being discussed tomorrow at a meeting with JTS, SRF, and the district. So once we get through that, we'll be able to turn the contractor loose to actually work. And I mentioned last time, they've requested continuous presence from inspectors at St. Louis Park, watching over their shoulder as they go through and make every single correction so that this thing is done and done right. And for what it's worth, I mean, JTS has expressed a lot of eagerness and pace and has responded the way that we would hope they would, and they're eager to get the corrections done in the field. So once we get through that process, we will need to update the board on how we're formally closing the boardwalk and the length of time it's going to take the contractor to sweep through the whole length and make all fixes. So I'm going to pause there, see if there are questions. There weren't at the last meeting. Not a massive update, but we're one step closer to approving all of the adjustments that need to be made. And Mike's here and has been leaning in every single meeting that we've had with all of those parties that I just mentioned.
So the city inspector will be on site 100% of the time? They're working, is that what you said?
That's one of the requests that the contractors made, which I think we viewed as favorable because, you know, they're taking it very serious. So between whether it's our staff, I mean, the city has code enforcement, so they want the city there. And the city's been a really, really great partner. And I think that they'll be accommodating that.
Okay.
Quick update on land and water partnership. There's a number of different happenings. You receive periodic updates, and you're going to start, as a matter of that program, getting more cyclical updates on projects that we're discussing with partners that are in the hopper. But I want to talk about some conversations that we've been having with Deep Haven. Earlier this year, the city of Deep Haven, including their staff, consulting engineer, and the mayor, reached out with interest in looking at opportunities for stormwater management and support for stormwater management planning and implementation across the whole city. They have nuisance drainage issues. They're looking at a comprehensive road recon CIP. They want to deal with failing outfalls that discharge to the lake, and they were looking for help in kind of making sense of all that and stacking the work into CIP and seeing where we might be able to help. Out of all of the planning work that we've done back and forth with them and WSB, there's 2 projects that have been identified as cost effective that the city's interested in advancing. One of them's in partnership, and one of you will quiz me on location and cost, and I don't have it at my fingertips, but there's a church that they're working with that has some adjacent land that does have decent ROI on for stormwater management. And they're going to be seeking application to Hennepin County's Natural Resource Opportunity Grant, which is an annual cyclical grant for those projects, and they've requested a letter of support from the district, which is due July 20th, and we're planning on providing it. As a side note, the county has asked our staff, because they respect our opinion, to sit on their advisory or their review board or review committee, I guess you'd call it, for those natural resource opportunity grants. So they're working through how we'll firewall and recuse ourselves if we're providing letters of support. But we're getting eyes on all of the grants that are coming through the county and able to weigh in on them. So that's a real positive. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
President White, managers, I'll amend James' note. It's Calvary Church
Okay.
is where it is. So it's just right down the road here. They're going through a major redevelopment, and they have a lot of green space to be able to kind of pull some of those stormwater management.
Yeah, so the city's talking to them on a real estate basis and figuring out if there's an opportunity to route some of the public right away, as well as deal with water from that site, and it'll help solve some backyard nuisance drainage issues downstream, but also get water quality benefit. The last note here, I don't technically have to get into this because Manager Miller said he would bring it up during issues, inquiries, and ideas, and you must have just forgotten, but he'd asked me before the meeting about where we stand on Taft Legion. So I'll give a quick briefing there. Open the dam.
Yeah. The dam just opened.
Coming from this way,
That was a big thunderclap.
Boy, that was,
and
I thought it was the car hit.
Going to be some big rain. So I think the board's tracking the Taft Legion project that we invested in to treat, I think, about 1,800 acres of drainage from the city of Richfield and part of Metropolitan Airports Commission after construction's had some initial performance issues. Staff now, I think we're in 2.5 years of being working very closely with the city's water treatment staff and engineering. And you've been briefed, I think, in the past on some of the operational adjustments that have been made. So adjustments to flocculants, chemicals, disc filters, pumps, intakes. They've been tweaking all of the operations of that plant ever since they built it. Where we stand is the Legion Infiltration Gallery, which is a part of a pumped infiltration gallery system that is upstream of Taft Lake. We have the monitoring on it to show that it is meeting performance standards, so they brought that part of the project into compliance. Taft Lake, which is withdrawing water from Taft and running it through a flock system, has improved steadily in performance over time. It's still short on the total targets that were written explicitly into the agreement for funding, and you know that we're continuing to cover the debt service on the municipal bonds that were issued for that. And so we've taken the board's concern and communicated to the city over the last year that, servicing the debt on a project that isn't meeting targets gives us some concern. And the city's response in coordination with us was to contract with Bar Engineering to evaluate the basis of design to see if, those targets were really achievable based on existing water quality standards and the design of the system and how it's working. They've gone through and done a really great job of evaluating all the troubleshooting that's gone on and how far we've come in making progress towards targets, and they've outlined potential next steps. So I think we're in the final leg this year of being able to close this out. Basics are, it's not clear that the system will ever reach the full design standards, but we've started to, here comes the rain. We've started to frame that the goal of the project was to get Taft Lake delisted and off of the impaired waters list. And if the project can do that, that would be a successful project because we'll achieve water quality standards. And so the city's next step with Bar Engineering is they're running a lake response model. So they're looking at all the things that have been done, the nutrient budget to the lake, and that is going to show if the level of current operation will tip the lake into being delisted and chip away at consistently improving water quality, or if a supplemental and traditional alum dosing at city cost will get the lake to meet standards. So the output of that model is going to inform the city's decision. And then once we know that the lake's going to be delisted or it's on track to being delisted this year, with or without additional investment, one of the things that we've talked about is we can amend the basis of the cooperative agreement based on all the science that we have and make sure the targets are the right targets. So a lot of that's been briefed in committee, but there has been some pretty long time gaps in between you receiving information. This is all in Tiffany and Josh's court. We've emphasized the need to the city to close the books on this by the end of this year. So that's your status update. I don't know if you want detailed follow-up or numbers, but that's sort of the general strategy. And that's what I have for the administrator's report this evening.
Thank you very much. Meeting is adjourned. Think of it as an hour and a half early, not late.